The letter sequence SOS, pronounced SOS, is used in Morse code as a distress signal, a way to call for help during an emergency, such as on a ship. Morse code uses clicks and pauses, short and long sounds, or flashes of light to represent letters and numbers. Morse code was invented by an American called Samuel Finley Breese Morse, 1791 to 1872. He was not only an inventor but also a famous painter. Morse code is a method used in telecommunication to encode text characters as standardized sequences of two different signal durations, called dots and dashes, or dits and das. Morse code is named after Samuel Morse, one of the inventors of the telegraph. The most well-known signal sent using Morse code is and is the distress signal SOS. Morse code requires the time between dits and das, between letters, and between words to be as accurate as possible. A dit takes 1 unit of time. A dot takes 3 units of time. The pause between dit/das, 1 unit of time. The pause between letters, 3 units of time. The pause between words, 7 units of time. Before the invention of the telegraph, most messages that had to be sent over long distances were carried by messengers who memorized them or carried them in writing. These messages could be delivered no faster than the fastest horse. Messages could also be sent visually, using flags and later, mechanical systems called semaphore telegraphs, but these systems required the receiver to be close enough to see the sender, and could not be used at night. The telegraph allowed messages to be sent very fast over long distances using electricity. The first commercial telegraph was developed by William Fothergill Cooke and Charles Wheatstone in 1837. They developed a device which could send messages using electrical signals to line up compass needles on a grid containing letters of the alphabet. Then, in 1838, Samuel Morse and his assistant, Alfred Vail, demonstrated an even more successful telegraph device which sent messages using a special code, Morse code. Telegraph messages were sent by tapping out the code for each letter in the form of long and short signals. Short signals are referred to as dits, represented as dots. Long signals are referred to as das, represented as dashes. The code was converted into electrical impulses and sent over telegraph wires. A telegraph receiver on the other end of the wire converted the impulses back into dots and dashes, and decoded the message. In 1844, Morse demonstrated the telegraph to the United States Congress using a now famous message, "What hath God wrought?" The three types of visual distress signals. Visual distress signals include day signals that are visible in sunlight, night signals that are visible in the dark, and anytime signals that can be used both day and night. Method of transmitting and receiving distress signals using Morse light. The most important are 1. Visual signals, such as a flame, a red flare, an orange smoke signal, a square flag displayed with a ball below, sounding of a fog signal apparatus. Three types of visual distress signals. 1. Visual signals. 2. Sound signals, such as a gun, rocket fired at regular intervals, or a continuous. 3 types of visual distress signals. 1. Visual signals. 2. Sound signals. 3. Radio signals such as Morse group SOS.
The first step is to always have your VHF radio on before heading out on the water, and adjust your volume and swell so that you can hear other traffic calling on the radio. The radio is now ready for calling and receiving calls on channel 16. Now let's imagine your vessel is in distress and requires immediate assistance. While lifting the key cover, hold down distress for 3 seconds to transmit the distress call. While holding down distress, countdown beeps sound and both the key and display backlighting blink. DSC channel 70 is automatically selected and the distress call is transmitted. The distress call is automatically transmitted every 3 to 5 minutes until an acknowledgement is received or a DSC cancel call is made. Push resend to manually transmit the distress repeat call. Push the right key and then push info to display the transmitted distress call information. A distress alert default contains your MMSI number, nature of distress, and position information. After transmitting the call, the transceiver waits for an acknowledgement call. Let's direct the simulator to send an acknowledgement call. After receiving the acknowledgement, push alarm off, then reply using the microphone. Since there is no voice communication on channel 70, and recognizing that not all vessels are equipped with DSC, once the distress call is issued on channel 70 by pressing the red distress button, you should issue a verbal mayday call. The M506 radio will automatically switch to channel 16 after using the distress button.
Searchlights are used and needed for various purposes in maritime industries. They are used for navigation purposes, e.g. to identify routes and ship buoys. They also support the search for missing people at sea and allow dangers such as icebergs to be detected at an early stage. A signal lamp, sometimes called an Aldous lamp, after Arthur Cyril Webb Aldous, who invented a widely used design, or a Morse lamp, is a visual signaling device for optical communication, typically using Morse code. Modern signal lamps are focused lamps which can produce a pulse of light.
Did you get that? If you lived in the 1850s or are a modern amateur radio operator, you might have. That's Morse code, and in an age of constant information communication, it wasn't too long ago that this communication method was vital to making the world go round. Back in the early 1800s, engineers and scientists were just starting to pioneer electrical communication methods. In 1836, Samuel Morse, Joseph Henry, and Alfred Vail invented the electrical telegraph system. It was the first system that allowed communication over great distances. However, there was a problem. It could only communicate pulses of electricity to another machine. This meant that you wouldn't be able to communicate using voice or text, so a new way of getting messages across the world was needed. A code was developed by none other than Samuel Morse to translate electrical pulses back into the original message. Originally, Morse's code only incorporated numbers, but Vail helped expand it to include letters and other characters. Morse code was born. The code assigned a sequence of short and long pulses to numbers and letters. Later, these pulses would be thought of as dots and dashes. The rules of Morse code are as follows. Each dot serves as the basis of time for the code. One dash is equivalent to the length of 3 dots. After each character, there's a silence that is equivalent to the length of 1 dot. This relative timing allows for Morse code to be easily sped up and slowed down, all while keeping the same pace. As far as how Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail decided on how to assign the specific sequences of dots and dashes to each letter, they actually studied the frequency of which each letter was used in the English language. They then assigned the easier dot and dash sequences to the most used letters during that time period. For example, E, the most common letter, is represented by a single dot. Originally, telegraph machines would mark sheets of tape with the message, but eventually telegraph operators learned to translate these dots and dashes audibly, making the tape unnecessary. This also meant that Morse code started being taught as an audible language, rather than a written one of symbols. In 1905, the International Morse Code Distress Signal was used, otherwise known as SOS. This became the standard maritime distress signal around the world within the coming years. These series of letters were actually chosen for their simplicity, not for the letters SOS. It wasn't until later that people began associating phrasing with those letters, like save our ship or save our souls. So, Morse code was invented as a necessity of the first mass communication method utilizing only electrical pulses. It was, and to some degree it still is, a vital means of communication across the world.